As we've seen, Genesis 34, terrible acts done by two of Jacob's sons. And the other sons later join in. These actions have long-term consequences for the family, specifically for Simeon and Levi. For generations, they will pay. Yet it also sets up the path for an amazing story of redemption. This is our God. The story of redemption is filled in Genesis. It's the first of everything, but it is the story of redemption. See, isn't it the case that in our worst of times, in our biggest sins, when we are honest with ourselves and understand our sinfulness, that we understand God's grace the most? Isn't it in those times when we understand how gracious He is and how much He has given us? When we realize what we deserve, we are struck with how wonderful the grace and mercy of God really are. So Genesis 33 ends with Jacob setting up an altar to El Elohi Israel, God, the God of Israel. Genesis 35 begins with God appearing to Jacob. But Genesis 34, God is completely absent. God is not in this chapter at all. And it's more than just a simple omission. It's showing us the godlessness of the patriarch's family. Jacob's family is now on a trajectory of moral decay that will be with them for a long time. Remember, Jacob had been given much by God. He was protected by from Laban. He was protected from Esau. He had been given great wealth. God appeared to Jacob numerous times. God spoke to Jacob directly and gave him the Abrahamic blessing. Jacob had been given a lot. And yet Jacob did not fully obey God. Jacob compromised. He spent time in Succoth, outside of Canaan. He went to Shechem and he settled there rather than Bethel. He compromised. This is a warning to us all. How do we compromise the commands of God? Do we follow Him the way that we should, or do we kind of? Do we kind of do the things? Jacob kind of did the things. And so he settled outside Shechem, and the influence of Shechem on Jacob's family is seen here. There is no prayer, there is no faith, and there is total godlessness in Jacob's family. The family that had been given direct revelation from God, the family that God spoke to, the family that God blessed, now was acting in a godless way. This should bring our memory back to Lot and Sodom. Remember, Lot lived near Sodom. He picked Sodom because it was lush, green area, good for him to raise his flocks. And so he lived near Sodom, and then he lived in Sodom. His family became indistinguishable. He lost his spiritual influence on his family. And we'll see the same here with Jacob and his family. Verse 1, now the daughter, Dinah, the daughter of Leah. See, this is important. There's only 2 times where a woman is introduced by her mother's name. This is one of them. It tells us 2 things. One, Leah was not the daughter of Jacob's favorite wife. Dinah was the daughter of Leah, the one that Jacob was forced to marry. It also informs us of who her full-blooded brothers were. Remember, Leah had children, and Bilhah had children, and Zilpah had children, and Rachel had one, Joseph, at this point. And so it sets the stage. It tells us who her brothers were. And so Dinah went out to see the women of the land. Literally, it says she went out to see the daughters of the land. The word daughter appears 14 times in this chapter. It's an important idea that Dinah was the daughter of Jacob. She was the daughter of Israel. She was of the patriarch's family. It's a big theme. Dinah was the daughter of Jacob. And what was done to her has a direct impact on Jacob's family. So she went out to see the women of the land. We aren't told why, and so it's pointless to speculate, although I will tell you that if you read the commentaries, there is an abundance of speculation as to why she did this. But the Bible doesn't tell us. But she left the protection of her family. She left the protection of her house. And she went out. She went out by herself. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, saw her, see, Hamor was the ruler of Shechem. Shechem was his son, the namesake for the city. Shechem was a prince of the city who was very well respected. He had a lot of influence, and presumably he would get whatever he wanted. And so he saw Dinah, and he was very attracted to her. He was a Hivite. The Hivites were a people group of Canaan. They were Canaanites. And we'll see them again in Joshua 9, when they deceived Israel into entering a treaty with them. The Hivites survived the conquest, and they became a thorn in the side of Israel for generations. Their godlessness, their idol worship was a continual temptation on the people of Israel. Verse 2, we see verbs in quick succession. When Jacob the son of Hamor, or when Shechem the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the land, he saw her, seized her, lay with her, and humiliated her. These words in quick succession, the way that this is communicated means that Dinah was not a willing participant. She was taken. She was essentially kidnapped and raped. This is what happened to the daughter of Jacob. But Shechem's soul was drawn to her. This is a deep, deep love that Shechem developed for Dinah. And he spoke to her tenderly. He tried to comfort her about what he had done. He tried to win her over to him. Dinah was in Shechem's house, unable to leave. And so Shechem told his father Hamor, do whatever you need to do to get me this girl as my wife. We go to verse 5. Jacob heard that he, Shechem, had defiled his daughter Dinah. Jacob's reaction or lack thereof should be a surprise to us all, because he seems to respond with complete indifference. He wasn't outraged. He didn't try to rescue her. His sons were out in the field keeping the livestock. He didn't tell them, and we'll see probably why later. Again, it's significant that his sons were out in the field, because remember, when they left Paddan Aram, Reuben, the oldest son, was at most 13 years old. And now all of the sons were out in the field working. A long time had passed. He had settled down in Succoth. He then settled in Shechem, and a long time had passed. He still did not go to Bethel, where he was supposed to go. But while his sons were out in the field, they heard about it. See, the implication is that this was public. The people of Shechem, of the city, knew what had happened, and they didn't do anything. Jacob heard, and his sons heard. The public knowledge plays an important role later on. The sons hear, and they were indignant and very angry. They responded in a way that Jacob probably should have responded. Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel. This is the first time that Israel is used as a people group. Remember, previous to this, it was only the person. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and Israel was him, and now Israel is the family. The nation has been born. And their first act as a people group is despicable. Remember also that Moses was writing this to the Israelites who were leaving Egypt, who were on their way to the promised land. And Moses is tying them together. You are one with them. Protect yourself. Don't respond in this way. See, the Israelites were distinct from the Canaanites. They were separate. They were supposed to remain distinct. But it's probably here, as the sons were in the field with the livestock, that they hear this, and on their way back to Jacob, they devise a plan. So Hamor came to Jacob to arrange the marriage. We see this in verse 8. The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give us your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us. The land shall be open to you. Dwell in it, trade in it, and get property in it. You see the danger here that Jacob put his family in. He was supposed to remain distinct. And now the temptation is there to become one with the Canaanites. Intermarry with us. Get property. Live here. Be one of us. Jacob was supposed to be distinct. He put his family at risk. He put the covenant at risk. And by settling here, Jacob had lost sight of the Abrahamic covenant and what Yahweh had done in their lives. After Hamor spoke, Shechem spoke. Verse 11. Shechem also said, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask for me as great a bride price and gift as you will, and I will give you whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife." It is clear that Shechem loved Dinah. He offered more than the customary bride price. There was generally a set price for the bride that the groom would pay. Yet we also see that he was not remorseful for what he had done to Dinah. There was no confession, no repentance. He didn't admit to anything. Instead, he said, "Let me find favor." This is a typical way that when deals were made, one would humble himself before another. But he had just kidnapped and raped Jacob's daughter. And so he's just placating with words. And so then we see in verse 13 the plot that was devised by Jacob's sons. I love that Moses is very clear at the very beginning. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father deceitfully. Apparently, they picked up the family trait. The trait that Laban had, the trait that Jacob had, the trait that Rebekah had. They also received it. And so they acted in deception, and they deceived Shechem and Hamor. Verse 14, they said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us." Notice, one, that it's the sons speaking and not Jacob. Right. There is some history in this. There is some culture in this, because remember when they were looking for a wife for Isaac, it was Laban who spoke. And so there is a sense in which the brothers would often speak on behalf of the family. But Jacob is losing influence. They spoke before he did. They had a plan and they left Jacob out of it. But yet Jacob remained silent. It seems, as we go through this passage, that the marriage was okay with Jacob. He had no problem with this, which should cause all of us to bristle a little bit. He was more concerned about keeping the peace with the Shechemites than he was about his own daughter. So we go to verse 15. Only on this condition will we agree with you that you become as we are, by every male among you being circumcised. Only then will we give our daughters to you, and will take your daughters to ourselves. Isn't it interesting that they use circumcision? See, the sons essentially tell the Shechemites that they had to start participating in Yahweh worship. Circumcision was the outward sign of the covenant. You, Shechemites, need to start Yahweh worship, which in and of itself is a very good idea. It's a good thing. You shouldn't marry pagans. You should marry only those who worship God. And yet, they were using what was supposed to be a sign of God's faithfulness and his blessing in a deceitful way to enact vengeance upon the people. They were taking what set them apart as God's people, and they were using it to kill, to destroy. The words pleased Hamor and Shechem, and they hurried off and told the elders of the city the proposal. We see this in verse 21. These men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Then verse 23, will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? See, as Jacob's sons acted deceitfully, so Shechem and Hamor responded deceitfully. They hurried off. They talked to the elders. They met at the city gate. Archaeologists have uncovered old city gates, and there were benches along the gate where the elders of the city would sit. And that's where decisions were made. That's where commerce happened. That's where contracts were entered into. And so Shechem and Hamor go back and they tell the people there, here's what's being offered. But they left out their own selfish reasons. They left out the marriage to Dinah. They left out what Shechem had done and why he wanted to marry her. But their goal was to assume Jacob's family into their city. If we do this, all of their stuff, all of their identity will be one with us. We will gain much wealth by this. Jacob and his family would disappear, and Shechem, the city, would prosper. There was no real intent to convert. The circumcision would be meaningless. This would be a mass conversion in order to get what they want. But every male listened and was circumcised. The idea was short-term pain for long-term gain. We would gain so much wealth. But the stage was now set for Simeon and Levi. On the third day, when the men were sore. That's probably putting it mildly. But there were rabbinic writings that the third day after a circumcision was the day of the most pain. It was the day when the men would basically be unable to move because of the pain. And so Simeon and Levi obviously are aware of this. And so they go into the city boldly and they kill all of the men, specifically Shechem and Hamor, and they rescue Dinah from Shechem's house. There's some debate as to whether or not the marriage had already happened, but what's clear is that Jacob had agreed to this marriage. Jacob didn't say no. Jacob was okay with what happened to Dinah and then the marriage that would have followed. Simeon and Levi go in and they kill everybody. They kill all the men. And then his other sons follow up. The other sons come upon the slain. They plunder the city because Dinah was defiled. The people knew, but did nothing about it. There was collective guilt, at least in the eyes of Jacob's sons. And so the sons took everything from the city, everything from the field, everything from the houses. They plundered the city, and then they captured the women and the children. Remember, the Bible tells us what happened. It doesn't condone their actions. By telling us what happened, it is not saying that this was a proper behavior by Jacob's sons. Jacob's sons did not act in a righteous or godly way. They went way overboard. One could argue that Shechem deserved to die for what he had done. But the punishment would have stopped or should have stopped with Shechem, not with the entire city. They took everything. They went much further than justice required. They acted in anger. They didn't pray. They didn't seek God's justice. They didn't wait for the covenant promise. Remember, the covenant promise was anyone who dishonors you, God would deal with. God would take care of them. They didn't want to wait for God to do what God promised he would do. They wanted to do it themselves. Maybe they didn't trust that God would be harsh enough. Have you been there? I'm sure you have. I know I have. When somebody wrongs you, do you know that God says, vengeance is mine, I will deal with this? And do you think, well, maybe that's not enough? There needs to be justice, and I need to be the one to do it. That was Jacob's sons. They didn't wait for the covenant promise to be fulfilled. The moral decay of Jacob's family was now in full swing. Verse 30. Jacob heard what happened. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few. And if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. These are the first and only words of Jacob in this entire section. He didn't speak up for Dinah. He spoke up when he was directly impacted. Jacob was now worried. Jacob was concerned. What would happen if they came at me? What happens if all of these people gather together and they attack us? I am just a few people. There is no way that I can withstand this. Now, we know that Jacob understood God's providence. We know that Esau had come at Jacob with 400 men and God protected him. He knows that Laban came at him and God protected him. But this time was different. This time was different because Jacob knew that his sons had done something horrible. What if God undoes the promise? What if God pays us back for what you had done? What if God is no longer protecting us? He was worried. And one could argue, rightly so. Jacob didn't understand the promise. They deserved punishment. What would God do? Jacob didn't know. And for our purposes, you have to wait till next week because it's addressed in the next chapter. So Jacob scolded his sons, but they were not about to sit quietly and hear the hypocrisy of Jacob. So they respond in verse 31, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? Jacob was more concerned about public perception and his own safety than he was his daughter. He allowed his daughter to be kidnapped and raped, and he didn't say anything in response. He didn't try to rescue her. He didn't speak up about it. He didn't do anything. He was going to allow her to be bought. He scolds his sons for what they had done, and they call him out on his hypocrisy. Jacob, you can't take the moral high ground here because you remained silent. Shechem didn't treat Jacob or his family with honor. He kidnapped one of them. He took one of them. He dishonored one of them. Jacob, how can you say here that you're afraid that our family is going to stink to the inhabitants when it already does? Look at what they have done to us. If Jacob was going to claim the moral high ground, his sons were not going to allow it to pass silently. See, Jacob had lost influence on his family. They had seen his hypocrisy. He claimed morality, but he lived in disobedience to God's commands. He needed to be in Canaan, but he diddle-daddled in Succoth. He was supposed to go to Bethel, but he settled in Shechem. He was to remain separate from the Canaanites, and yet he was willing that his daughter would marry a Canaanite. See, let this be a lesson for all of us. When we compromise our faith, those around us see it, especially our children. See, one of the main reasons why young adults leave the church is because they see their parents claim one thing and then live differently. When you look at the studies that have been done for the mass exodus, the seeming mass exodus of people who grew up in the church leaving, one of the main reasons why young adults give is that their parents say this on Sunday, and then Monday through Saturday they act completely different. There is nothing there. When nothing distinguishes a Christian from the world, it communicates that Christianity doesn't matter, or that the so-called Christian doesn't believe the Bible. When we become one with the world, Christianity offers nothing. When we bend, when we give in to what the world says, there is nothing that separates us from the world. Our faith must impact and change our lives. Christianity has a ton to offer, but we have to live it to see it. I mean, think about this. There are many Christians who sign their kids up for Sunday morning sports. And then they don't attend the body of Christ together on Sundays. Why? Because sports. You have a soccer game, you have whatever. And so what happens is that the kids grow up and they realize that church isn't important. It's only there. It's only necessary when there's nothing else going on. When there's nothing else to do. If we get busy, well, then we'll just not do that. And then the kids grow up and they realize church isn't important. Why would I go? My parents have shown me it's not important at all. And then they grow up. And they move to a new city. They get a new job. They don't spend time looking for a church. They don't go. And the parents wonder why. Now, this is no guarantee that if you come to church every Sunday, then your kids will be. But what it does show is, what do you communicate to your kids? What do you communicate to others? Everything we do communicates something. And people are watching. So Jacob had compromised the commands of God by not returning immediately to Bethel. He lingered in Succoth and Shechem, and his kids saw it. He was more concerned with being accepted by the Canaanites and than he was in being obedient or standing up for righteousness. He compromised. He lost the spiritual leadership of his family, of his household, and his entire family would soon reap what he had sown. Brothers and sisters, know how vital it is that we live out our faith. The enemy will continue to put distractions in front of us. He will tempt us with things that we think we want. And when we compromise our faith, we are communicating to others and to our own souls that God doesn't satisfy. We say that his way is not the best, that his body isn't important, that he doesn't love us, or that the world offers something better. And when we do this, our light grows dim, and we lie to ourselves and our own souls. We know that salvation is not by works, but works show what we believe. When we give our lives to Jesus, it isn't just for heaven, it's for now. He is Lord of all things, including us. Let us live accordingly. His grace is endless, and he deserves it all. Let's pray.